Hello and welcome to Live at Productronica. It's been a hectic day, absolutely really busy, and the halls have been much busier than we expected for this show, which is good news. Joining me today in our Live at Productronica program, I'm delighted to introduce Dieter Weiss. Nice to see you, Dieter, and thank you for joining us today. We're also joined remotely from the United States, I believe, with Sanjay Huprikar from IPC. Hello, Sanjay. Can you hear us? Yeah.
Good afternoon, Dieter and Trevor.
We're not hearing him. Can we hear you now? Okay.
Hello, Dieter and Trevor.
Wonderful. Good to see you. Great.
Likewise.
So it's been an interesting show. There's been quite a lot going on, but I wanted to go through some of the things that are happening in the European theatre. The EMS industry has been extremely active and busy in recent months. Let's start by asking you, Dieter, there's been a number of mergers and acquisitions in recent months. Is this trend continuing, or do you think it's coming to the end of its cycle?
Well, if you look at the mergers and acquisitions this year, it is more or less exploding. To some people, it's already long term ago that Katec bought Lesus.
Yep.
But in actual fact, it's only happened early this year.
Yep.
Yeah. Then we had VDL Group buying a smaller EMS company called TBP Electronics in the Netherlands, followed by Zero from Germany buying Solid Cemex in the Netherlands, and today we received another press release that Zero just bought Synchron EMS in Palm Bay, Florida.
Right.
Then we had Connect Group buying Icor in Spain and in Mexico. We had Talk Duotech buying ML and S in Germany. We had Rave Electronic buying Meyer Electronic in Germany. Mm-hmm. We had Escatec buying JGS Manufacturing in the UK and Slovakia. We had Katec buying a smaller company in the Netherlands called Eisler BV. Yeah. We have seen that a private equity called One Equity Partners, which you might remember from taking over Spatronics in the United States last year, yep, taking over 29.3% of the shares of Secor in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. We saw Altrix and Proto Electronics in France, Portugal, and Tunisia bought by a private equity in Paris. We saw Node buying iPro Holdings in the UK. Yeah. We saw Daracon Oy from Finland buying an EMS company in Sweden. We saw Seco buying Garz and Fricke. We saw Hansa AB buying Helmut Byers in Germany. And the last one was Sycor buying Axis Electronics in the UK. And just that is, or are those acquisitions which were not by private equity companies. On top of that, there is many investments of private equity companies in this business, and it is totally overheated.
Right, and there's been even more acquisitions, of course, and mergers in the United States in recent months. So, I mean, what do you think's going on here? Maybe Sanjay, you can jump in on this one. I mean, is it a case of a lot of private equity companies are trying to swallow up these smaller outfits to bring some consolidation into the market? Do they see the obvious opportunities in electronics manufacturing, which is exploding and expanding by application? What do you think is driving all this?
Well, it's a great question, and actually Dieter answered this question in many of his columns. I think there's consolidation going on because it's the way for them to compete. Dieter has often spoken of the smaller players in the current times just not having enough leverage to make a healthy margin, and the way for them to do it is to start just stacking up different companies and putting them together to give them an opportunity. So I defer to my to my wise colleague in terms of the why, but that's what Dieter has spoken about often is in this current period, it's the larger companies that are faring better, and the smaller companies I think have made a decision that it's better to combine with others and have a fair chance.
Right. And I think that the larger companies can afford to implement the automation that's needed to be able to get the rise in production and quality that's needed in a smart factory.
Well, what we see in the market is from the OEMs who are the customers of the EMS, there is a stronger desire in two ways. Number one is to have a one-stop supplier whom they can get the orders not only for the PCBA manufacturing. That is a business where margins are reducing more and more.
Yeah.
No, they want to have a one-stop operation which is capable of doing the box building, doing the engineering.
Design.
And we had this discussion today in another panel over here at the exhibition. It is about sustainability as well. And sustainability means that OEM customers are looking into the direction of getting the products made closer to the end market.
Right.
Which means they want not just the cheapest country to manufacture the product, which, by the way, it's a long time ago.
Right.
When China was a cheap country.
That's true.
China is not a cheap country anymore.
That's true.
And it's an expensive country. And Europe, and not only Eastern Europe, but Western Europe as well, can compete. Yeah, and they can manufacture the products without having to transport them half the way around the world, generating a huge carbon dioxide footprint. Yeah, and it. We have seen it last week with G26.
Yeah.
We should not wait for politicians to make the decisions for us. And us, the industry, we are going ahead without waiting for the politicians to tell us what to do. We, industry companies, we make the decisions. And our clear way is we want a more sustainable way of manufacturing products and closer to the end product. And we see a lot of activities where products for the Western European markets are coming back to Europe. And that to say so, I like it.
Yeah, and it's also happening in the Americas too. But I mean, a sustainable economy is definitely something that we're needing. But some of the governments are doing their part, because I believe here in Germany that manufacturers are being mandated to reduce their energy footprint by 20%. This has been asked by the government, and the same thing is happening, believe it or not, in China. In China, they're asking the manufacturers to reduce their energy output by 20%, and if they don't do it, they reduce. They shut them down for a day.
They shut them down. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So,
but we have to look a little bit deeper on that. We need to realize that 60% of all electricity in China is still made from fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels, yeah.
And we have to realize that 1 ton of carbon actually generates 3.66 tons of carbon dioxide, and it's not acceptable anymore. Yeah,
Right.
and if we look to Europe, yes, we still need to have reduce our fossil fuels as well, but we are further advanced. We have a lot of alternative energy, and I've never been an enemy of atomic energy. And if you look at France, I think 85% of French electricity is made of atomic energy, and that has no or very few carbon dioxide
but
footprint.
it does also it has waste problems, so let's face it.
Yes, yes, that's for sure. But at the moment, we need to make decisions based on the fact what is the lesser
Evil.
the problem. And so companies are thinking of that. And as you mentioned that areas are shut down or factories are shut down, just imagine if you have a supplier in China who all of a sudden is shut down due to this for 2 weeks, or just due to the fact that for the Olympics in Peking, they want to have a cleaner air.
And they move all the companies.
Then you are left in the middle, and you get no supplies. And I can tell you, for my daughter, who is working for a big OEM in logistics, and they already got back 2 products which they had been manufacturing with an EMS company in China, and they got it back to Germany. And it's not a trend that it's now being manufactured by the OEMs themselves. So there is no insourcing again. No, there is insourcing and outsourcing. The main issue is the reliability of supplies in combination with sustainability. And here, the EMS industry has a huge chance of showing the OEMs that they can do it better.
They certainly have, but and certainly European manufacturers are totally, I'm sure, on board with that. But I mean, Sanjay, what do you think the appetite is like, for example, in the United States around the topic of sustainability? Is it something that's high on their list?
Yeah, I mean, Europe has always taken the leadership role in environmental concerns and sustainability. I think the U.S. companies or North American companies have been following that. I'm going to underscore a point that Dieter made earlier, which I think is really important, and that is you are seeing a movement within the U.S. and in Europe for a more resilient supply base. Dieter can speak to the details, but recently there was a semiconductor company, I believe it was Infineon, Dieter, that opened up a new facility in Austria. In September, the European Union talked about teeing up a concept called the European Chips Act, which was all about making sure that there's a resilient domestic supply of product. And I think we're seeing that theme across multiple geographies. Europe, of course, we're seeing that in North America as well. The companies want to be less reliant on foreign supply. They want to be able to control their own destiny. They want to be able to shorten the supply chain, the length of the supply chain, as Dieter said earlier. And this is a movement that IPC supports. The spin that we put on it is that we don't think it's just about the semiconductors. A chip can't do anything on its own if it's not connected to a printed circuit board. So our encouragement to the EU has been, don't just look at it from a semiconductor point of view, look at it from a total electronics ecosystem point of view. Include the printed circuit board, include the printed circuit board assembly, include the other materials that go into creating an electronic device. So we would like to see an expansion of the ecosystem to include circuit board and circuit board assembly, not just the semiconductor.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's very true. I mean, it's evident from talking to vendors and EMS companies that business is strong here in Europe, and it's largely driven by the automotive and industrial applications. So what are the underlying trends that are happening in the market?
Well, referring to Sanjay, at the moment we have a heated discussion on semiconductors, and the problem mainly generated, I have to say generated by the automotive industry. I have this feeling that the automotive industry in 2017 to 2019 already manufactured more than the market demanded.
Right.
So there was an overheating, and then all of a sudden, and that is my personal opinion, COVID came as a happy event for the automotive industry to say we need to cut our building programs, get out the dead bodies out of the basement and throw them into the river. And they immediately cut all their demands for 4 or 5 months. Now, sorry, no matter what perfect logistical system you have, nobody can react to that in such a
they,
way.
they can't. They can't. But Dieter, I mean, that's growing pains among the automotive guys because they're relatively new to the electronics world.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right. I think they did overbuy back in 2019.
You remember, in addition, we had NXP having shut down of 2 factories in Texas due to the winter storms.
Yeah.
We had Renesas, I think, in April with a fire. We had a problem in Taiwan with water problems. And the factory Sanjay mentioned in Austria, I think it was Infineon, just opening a new factory. In addition, Bosch just opened a new semiconductor factory. But for example, on Bosch, I think it's not a foundry, it's just for their own purposes.
Right. But
so
it's an interesting point, and I want to talk about that because Bosch obviously is building its own fab capacity in Germany. But what about, and we, there's still not, as Sanjay mentioned, enough support industries around that. We need OSATs as well as PCB manufacturing companies and assembly companies.
Yes. It is. At the moment, I get the feeling that politics jump on a subject which they just heard, and it's just hip to talk about semiconductor at the moment, because the automotive industry is yelling the loudest.
Well,
yeah,
is
but
that
in
the
actual
case?
fact, we need more. Yeah, and I'm very positively surprised by the French. Because they have realized, and the French associations have realized, that just looking into the semiconductor is not solving the problems. We need to look at the full chain of products, and the French government has set up a lot of projects to help the other industries as well. And to be honest, I get the feeling that the German governments are sleeping, or they have been just focusing on the elections that just happened,
Right.
and had no other thing. And I wonder when they finally wake up. And I do not see any association other than the IPC looking into it and strongly supporting it. And
Right.
I have to say it over here that I'm very grateful for the IPC, in specific John Mitchell and Sanjay Hebrika, to support the Europeans on this issue and bringing the topic up and bringing it to the carpet.
Yeah. No, I think IPC is a very professional organisation. I think they do a superb job, and it's good to see them active in the European theatre. But one of the trends that I'm seeing, and I'm hearing it a lot around this show, is the vendors and the equipment people are moving much more into the semiconductor space. They're going into the sub 5 micron space. And if you open up your iPhone, you look today, there's maybe 8 big chips in it. There's very few discrete semiconductors in there. So are things moving more and more towards a packaging future? I mean, what's your view on that, Sanjay? I mean, it seems to be driving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theme that I brought up earlier about not looking at it from a piece part standpoint, but looking at it from an ecosystem standpoint, I think applies to this as well. You hear the phrase advanced packaging.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of initiatives both in Europe and in North America to really talk about advanced packaging, and it requires a commitment from all phases of the supply chain to kind of put their egos aside and recognize that these are all things that work together. It's interoperability. The plastic folks need to be talking to the chip folks. The chip folks need to be talking to the OSATs. The OSATs need to be talking to the substrate and the PCB guys.
Yep.
We need to get the right players from all of these different areas to get together and think through, how do we establish guidelines? How do we establish standards? And how do we march down that learning curve of, continuing to shrink and miniaturize? And while we're shrinking and miniaturizing, we're expecting our systems to do 10x, 100x of what they were doing before in terms of performance.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, and it's certainly a challenge that Dieter sees on a regular basis when he's doing his survey work, when he's talking to all his executives. We see it when we're talking to our technical community. This is an area that is of strong consideration. There's already examples in Europe AT&S is a great example, the largest PCB manufacturer in Europe. They have dedicated, and you can quote me on the exact number, Dieter, but I think AT&S is investing 500 million euros over the next 7 to 10 years to figure out this whole advanced packaging. And I think you're
Right.
going to see other companies do it, and you're certainly seeing IPC step up to talk about this issue and the importance of this issue. So
Yeah.
it's one of the, I think the key, when you look at the future, Trevor, I think it's the key area to focus on, or one of the key areas is what's going on with advanced packaging.
Well, I agree. I mean, and one of the initiatives we've got at the moment, of course, is heterogeneous integration, and all that is heterogeneous integration is really making packages out of chiplets, which have got materials that are compatible. They don't have too many CTE mismatches and this type of thing. So why don't we take that further up the food chain to the assembly world and use a lot more compatibility among materials in assembly? That would make our lives and our quality and reliability inexorably better.
Yeah, I think it's an element, we call the
we've
initiative
lost the sound
here
feed on
Factory of the
Sanjay.
Future.
Okay, you got him back? Sorry, we
you hear
lost
me?
you there for a second, Sanjay.
Oh, no problem. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. I was just going to say that we hear a lot about Industry 4.0, of course. It's probably a very big theme at the Productronica show this week. Factory of the Future, as IPC likes to call the initiative, does encompass a lot of these technologies. It encompasses cybersecurity. It encompasses sustainability. And Dieter mentioned France earlier today in terms of some of the innovative work that they've done. Lacroix is a great example of an EMS company in France doing incredible amount of innovative work. They just released a press release, I think, early part of this week, talking about their utilization of something called IPC CFX, which is a communication standard that really simplifies data transfer. It allows real-time process improvement. And this is the type of innovation that we see as a partnership between governments, private sector, associations like IPC, working together to figure out how can companies, specifically EMS companies, how can they modernize and how can they transform themselves into becoming the factory of the future. So with all of the negativity that you see in terms of costs going up and labor shortages, the silver lining still is that this industry and EMS companies specifically are on the forefront of innovation. And it's great to see French companies and German companies and companies in Estonia and companies in Eastern Europe really doing some innovative work out there. And I think, Trevor, at some point in the future, we should have a spotlight on innovation because there's a lot of it going on, and it's masked right now by pandemic and supply chain shortages and chip issues. But really, there's a lot of innovation going on.
Yeah, we've started actually including an innovation page in our monthly magazine, but you're absolutely right, Sanjay. There are some incredible technologies coming down the pipe, some real game changers actually. So that's interesting. Before we let you go, Sanjay, one last question. What other sort of legislation is IPC working on with the European Commission to help our sectors of the industry?
Yeah, so we regularly champion the issues that our members are facing, both on the EMS side and the PCB side. Certainly, any environmental legislation, we have our team in Brussels and in Washington all over focused on what's going on there. I mentioned the European Chips Act earlier. We're very much focused on making sure that that initiative expands out to include circuit board and circuit board assembly. So these are some of the key areas that we are focused on as an organization in terms of helping to serve the electronics industry.
Great. Okay. So thank you very much for that. So just final question to you, Dieter. I mean, you bring out your annual report on the state of the EMS industry. When can we expect the next one?
Well, you wouldn't believe it. We are already preparing for it,
Yeah.
I have to mention it as well that the IPC is supporting this work tremendously, and I have to thank the IPC once again for this support. And I hope we have the next annual report ready mid of February. Yeah,
Okay.
normally our goal is 6 weeks after the end of the calendar year,
Yeah.
which for most companies is the end of the fiscal year as well. And we have certain rules for companies which close with a fiscal year different to the calendar year. So it is, as long as it's always the same, it's not a problem, and you can rely on these figures. And they're very, very good benchmark figures for the industry.
Right.
And a lot of EMS companies are supporting our work of Informa, and we hope that will continue in
Yeah.
this way.
Great. Okay. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for taking part in the live at Productronica today. I'm sorry you couldn't join us in person, Sanjay, but you know, I'm sure we'll be able to catch up at Apex in a few weeks' time.
Sanjay,
Well, I was
we
there in
miss you
spirit.
here.
I was there in spirit, and Trevor, thank you for the opportunity. And Dieter, always a pleasure to hear your take on the industry. It's fantastic.
Great. Okay. So,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of Live at Productronica today. Join me tomorrow at the same time for a wrap up on what's been happening in Munich this week.